For more than 30 years, the Australia Institute has been producing research that matters. But how do you turn big, bold ideas into positive change? In this series, I'm speaking to some of Australia's and the world's best thinkers about how to make change for the better. I'm Paul Barclay. This is What's the Big Idea? Brought to you by the Australia Institute. And today I'm talking to Richard Dennis, the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, well-known economist, author and public policy commentator. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Paul.
In your contribution to What's the Big Idea, you fact-check some of the false assumptions that tend to be embedded in how we talk about the economy. Economies don't have a backbone, you write. Exports per se are not good for the economy, and the fossil fuel industry is in fact a tiny contributor to employment and government revenue. Now, what's your aim in challenging these assumptions?
Well, look, I've got lots of aims, to be clear. But my biggest aim is for us to have an honest conversation. An honest conversation. This sounds a bit grandiose, but you can't have good democracy without good, honest public debate about hard things. And we won't all agree. 25 million Australians won't all agree on what the country should prioritise and what kind of things we should do more of. That's fine. Like I'm a Democrat. I will go along with not getting my way all the time. But what I can't go along with is people lying, flat out lying to the public's face to get what they want for the economy, what they want for their society, what they want. I'm not opposed to them making a claim for what they want. You know, if Australians want to have really low taxes and a really crap health system like America, well, I think that's a bad idea. And I will make all sorts of arguments, economic, historic, and moral, for why I think that's a bad idea. But if we go and do it, okay, we can go and do it. But doing it because someone told us we had to do it that way, doing it because we got told that if we didn't do it that way, then the economy would go to hell in a handbasket and your kids will never get a job. Well, no, I'm not having that. So to be as honest as I can, why do I want to talk about these things? One, because we can't have a good democracy if people are just going to lie about such important things. And two, I do have a preference for collecting a bit more tax from the fossil fuel industry and spending more of it on public health and public education. That's my preference. That's not my expertise. I can make economic arguments for it, but even if I wasn't an economist, my desire to live in that country is legitimate and I should be allowed to say it. But in Australia, we've kind of been trained that you're not allowed to say things like that because you haven't even got any economic modelling.
Not only that, you do realise how deeply embedded this idea about the fossil fuel industry being so important to the Australian economy is. I mean, even the way we view the Australian economy as a great big quarry where we dig out our natural resources, we export them overseas, and this is the reason we are so prosperous. It's actually a myth, really, isn't it?
Yeah. It absolutely is a myth. And just to be clear, we do dig up a lot of iron ore. We really do. It's a big number. And we do dig up a lot of coal. And we do drill for a lot of gas. You know, we're the world's third largest fossil fuel exporter. Okay? Saudi Arabia 1, Russia 2, Australia 3. We export a lot of fossil fuels. That's true. Full stop. No debate. It's just not true that that's the major employer in Australia. It's just not true that despite the size of that, it's not true that that's what funds all of our schools and hospitals. It's just not true that if we didn't export so much gas, we'd go to hell in a handbasket because you know what? We didn't export much gas until 2015. I'm an old man, Paul. 2015 feels like yesterday. I've got unfinished projects that are older than that. You know, I've got things on my to-do list from 2015 that I'm still chipping away on. And that's when we started to be one of the world's largest exporters of gas. So it's just not even historically true that we can't live without gas exports because you know what? in 2014 we were living without gas exports. It's just silly, but it's said so loud, it's said so confidently, it's said so regularly, and it's said by so many people wearing such expansive suits in such prestigious ways and prestigious platforms that the people listening to this are thinking, oh, I like Richard, and that sounds about right, but it can't be quite right, because how could that many people lie to me?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, in relation to exports, and you remind us of this in your piece, that Australia has, for a variety of reasons over decades, consciously decided to either restrict or ban certain exports, despite the financial benefits they may have delivered to the companies doing the exporting. We've made decisions not to go ahead with those exports. Just remind us of some of those examples, Richard.
Oh, well, indeed. I mean, in my lifetime, feeling very old today, Paul, Australia was whaling. We were whaling in Western Australia. Once upon a time, whaling was big in Byron Bay and Ballina. And you know what? When we banned whaling, it was bad for the whaling industry. I promise you that banning whaling was bad for the whaling industry. I promise you that whalers lost their job. I promise you that the whalers didn't pay as much tax. But you know what? We decided that there were other ways to get oil and meat than killing an endangered species, so we stopped doing it. You know what the whalers said at the time? Oh, it's the end of the world. Oh, you'll ruin the economy. Oh, you'll ruin this town. Well, I don't want to ruin towns. I don't want to ruin people's lives, but I don't want whales to go extinct as well. And if we, as a nation state, one of the richest countries in the world, want to help unemployed whalers, we can do that in a heartbeat. Mm. And if we want to help people that lose their jobs in coal mines, we can do that in a heartbeat, because we're rich. But rather than say, oh, if Barry the coal miner lost his job, how could we help him? We're like, oh, if Richard gets his way, Barry will lose his job, and then Barry will die in poverty. So the reason we have to cause climate change is Barry. But you know what the coal industry would do in a heartbeat? Sack Barry if they can get a robot truck. I don't hate Barry the coal miner. I've spent my life trying to say, hey, how's that going to affect workers? Hey, how's that going to affect disadvantaged groups? It's a bit sick to think that global fossil fuel companies are the only people that care about the workers in Australia, and elite Richard, whatever that means, in his ivory tower, which I don't work in, I work at a not-for-profit think tank, he doesn't care about. So whaling, asbestos. Remember the good old days when we mined asbestos? Remember James Hardy? Remember the Hardy-Ferodo car race? All that asbestos, creating all those jobs and all those exports. We stopped that. Why? Because it was killing people. And just recently, we just banned, rightly, these composite stone bench tops that people put in their kitchens, because the workers who install them are inhaling dangerous dust, and it ruins their lungs and kills them. But you know what the stone benchtop industry said when we said, well, how about we stop that dangerous product for which there's a million alternatives? Oh, but you're going to destroy the economy and ruin jobs, and what about people's choice in kitchens? So it's just sick. If slavery was good for the economy, would we do it? No, that's not how democracies work.
I like the example of higher education as well, because I think that here is an industry that over the past few decades has grown to become a major export industry for Australia, delivering actually significant, unlike the mining sector actually, delivering significant government revenue via overseas student fees. Those fees have been used to fund the university sector on the whole. That's a whole other argument about how sensible that is, but let's put that aside. It has been a lucrative industry for the government, but it's made a decision, despite the money that it will lose, to cut back on foreign students, because it's made a broader decision that's affecting housing affordability. So it is a good example, whether that's true or not, a good example that we can make these decisions.
No, absolutely. We can make these decisions. We have made them in the past. We're in the middle of making one right now around international students. And it's just so important that we look at these specific examples and not think, oh, that's higher ed, I don't really care about that. What I'm trying to say to people in my essay is look at what we do, not what we say. As a nation state, the 13th biggest economy in the world, living at the richest point in history, if we want to spend $350 billion on submarines, because we want to, we can. That's how rich we are. We can come back to whether we should, but we're so rich that we can do that, no biggie. $250 billion worth of stage 3 tax cuts. We can afford to do that. Yep, no biggie. Don't worry. No one says that'll cause inflation. No one says that'll drive up the debt. That's rich people getting tax cuts money. That's the good stuff. If we want to do things, we can. Yeah, if we want to ban asbestos, we can, and we will. And we want to ban whaling, we can, and we will. And if we want to put a limit on foreign students, even though it's an export industry, even though it's a big job-creating export industry, if we want to do that, we can and we will. Can we stop building new gas? Oh, that's stupid, Richard. Do you not understand Economics 101? Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I was surprised actually reading your piece in the book how little tax fossil fuel exporters actually pay. They do make billions of dollars for themselves, the companies themselves, but the amount of money that they pay in levies and taxes back into Australia for access to our resources is paltry. Some projects, you point out, have never paid a cent of petroleum resource rent tax, for example. How can this be?
Not only have some projects never paid a cent in their so-called petroleum resource rent tax, some projects, their owners in their annual reports say, dear shareholders, we don't expect to ever pay any petroleum resource rent tax. And in our previous accounts, we misled you. In our previous accounts, dear shareholder, we factored in that we might pay for some of this, and I misled you. So allow me to correct the record as a reasonable director doing my reasonable director's duties. I feel obliged to let you know, dear shareholder, I don't think we'll ever pay any of it. So how would this sounds terrible, Paul, but let me try to get Australians to think of it like this. If Australians picked up a newspaper and read that a North African country was being exploited by British and American fossil fuel companies, and that the politicians had signed away a North African country's resources and that the country was getting bugger all in return, we would all tut-tut and not be very surprised. And if we read the same thing about Papua New Guinea, I think a lot of Australians would think, yes, well, what do you do, hey? But when I tell people that the Northern Territory government, not the largest government in Australia, perhaps not the best funded or most experienced bureaucracy, in negotiating with some of the world's largest fossil fuel companies, got dudded so bad that the Northern Territory taxpayers and the Australian taxpayers are subsidising foreign oil companies operating in Australia. We're like, oh, come on, it can't be that bad, Richard. Come on. Actually, I think we're so we're so full of ourselves. Arguably, some people are just instinctively racist that they think, only poor countries would get milked and dudded as bad as we've been milked and dudded. So how did it happen? It happened in full view.
Well, why did it happen, I suppose, is also the question, given that governments, state and federal, are in desperate need for revenue to fund schools, to fund hospitals, to fund aged care, universities, you name it, all in need of government funding. Yet here we are with a potential source of revenue, of tax revenue from these wealthy multinational fossil fuel companies, but we're not making them pay their fair share. Why aren't governments making them pay?
Oh, Paul. We're not in desperate need of money. We're not in desperate need of money. We just gave $250 billion worth of tax cuts. We're not in desperate need of money. We just spent $350 billion on some submarines we'll probably never use. We're not desperately short of money. We subsidise private schools. We're not desperately short of money. We spend $14 billion a year subsidising the fossil fuel industry. Neoliberalism's best trick is to make a rich country feel poor. Because if we accept, which I don't, if we accept that Australia is sort of broke, then it's obvious that we need the teachers and the nurses to fight about who deserves a wage rise more. If we accept that we're broke, then it's obvious that we can say, I'd love to protect the environment, but money doesn't grow on trees, If we accept that we're broke, it's really easy to say to 25 million people, cool your jets, lower your expectations, you can't have nice things. Why not? Oh, we've got to have submarines and tax cuts. So, why don't we tax the oil and gas industry? Because we don't want to, right? And when I say we, I mean the people we delegate to negotiate on our behalf don't want to. Just a little bit of history that people might have forgotten. When Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, when the Liberals were in power, they held an inquiry into why the petroleum resource rent tax doesn't collect any tax. I wrote a submission to that. I gave evidence to that. It's real. It happened. I went. It was run by Treasury. The Liberals had the inquiry. And the recommendations that came out were it's fine. Don't change it. This is not a Richard just found a little problem. There's a giant problem that's so big that even a Liberal Prime Minister said, oh, come on, these guys are taking the piss. And then our nation state said, all right, let us have a look at it for you, boss. Yeah, no, it's harder to fix than you might think. I guess the key part of my essay, key part of what the Institute does is that, we're rich and we have agency and we can't have everything, but we can have anything and our choices matter. Well, in Norway, they tax their fossil fuel industry and they give their kids free higher education. In Australia, we subsidise our fossil fuel industry and we charge our kids a fortune to go to uni.
And we tell our kids that we can't afford actually to give them free education.
Right, and that's the lie. We can afford to, we'd prefer not to. Okay, if you're earning $200,000 a year and you've bought yourself a big house and you've bought yourself a nice car and you've just come back from your overseas skiing trip and you tell your kids you can't afford for them to do piano lessons, what you meant to say was I prioritised something else. Now that's fine. Again, I'm a Democrat, right? We're not all going to get our way. We're not all going to get our lollies. But if what you meant to say was I spent all the money on the things I like and there's none left for you, that's okay. Own it. But don't tell me we can't afford it. Tell me the truth. Tell me you'd prefer to do something else. Economics 101 says economics is about choices. But we pretend we don't have choices. That's the ultimate neoliberal trick. There is no alternative.
I'm Paul Barclay. I'm talking with Richard Dennis, the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, well-known economist and author and public policy commentator. Richard's written about the issues he's talking about today in the book, What's the Big Idea? An anthology of big ideas put together by the Australia Institute. You can buy it now. The book features chapters by Yanis Varoufakis, Jennifer Robertson, Lucy Turnbull, Peter Doherty and other leading thinkers. What's the Big Idea? Available online from the Australia Institute website. I suppose a lot of this, Richard, comes down to the clout that the fossil fuel industry seems to have, in spite of the fact that, as we've already said, it contributes relatively few jobs, it contributes relatively little taxation revenue. How did they come to have so much clout and power over these decisions?
Oh, well, I was just watching a documentary about the Cold War and how before World War II ended, the English and the Americans and the Russians were literally divvying up the spoils, drawing lines on maps, deciding who would get what. And a big part of where those lines on maps went, and everyone knows this is true, we just look away from it, is where the oil was. And the Americans wanted the American oil companies to get the line on the map where it suited the Americans, and the English wanted the English oil companies to be on the right line, side of the right line, and so did the Russians. And I'm not saying it was all about oil, but I'm just saying that we know, no one doubts, no one disagrees that the oil industry's been playing geopolitics for a century. We know that the oil companies have had wars fought on their behalf. We know this is not conspiracy. This is just accepted Western history of the world we live in. But somehow when you get to Australia, everyone's like, oh, how come this fossil fuel industry's got some power? How did that come about? Like, I understand your question, but it's kind of weird. We're like, hang on, the most profitable industry in the world that's got some of the biggest, we're one of the biggest, but, some of the biggest empires in the world behind it. British Petroleum is what BP stands for. These companies that have been running rings around small countries for a century, how did they come to have power in Australia? Well, because that's what they're good at. I mean, that's their job. And I don't blame them for that. I blame our elected representatives. Let's be crystal clear about this. I do not blame an American company who has obligations for its shareholders to maximize its profit. I do not blame them for showing up in a country like Australia and lobbying our elected representatives to cut them such a sweet deal that they pay bugger all tax. That's their job. I blame our representatives for being unable to do what they've done in Norway, unable to do what they've done in Qatar, unable to do what they've done in Saudi Arabia, unable to do in other countries that have actually ensured that their citizens got the biggest share of the profits from the extraction and sale of their resources.
So why are they unwilling to act in this regard, to tax these companies?
Well, I don't know. What I know is they say it's because of jobs, and that's not true. What I know is they say it's because they pay so much tax, and that's not true. What I know is they say it's because of exports, but I know that's not true. What I don't know is why they do this. What I do know is that a lot of them go to work for the oil and gas and coal industry when they're finished. Not making that up. Not hard to confirm. Right? What I do know is that the National Party, the so-called Farmers' Party, is on the side of the frackers and the coal miners and opposed to the farmers when the farmers say, I don't want people to frack on my farmland.
Yeah. And the other broader point that you make actually is this whole discussion around taxing the fossil fuel sector is tied to a bigger discussion about taxing itself, why we have taxes, how do we levy these taxes. So, for example, we heavily tax cigarettes and alcohol because we want to deter people from drinking and smoking because of the harms it causes, because of the cost to our health system. And on the other hand, we subsidise things that we want more of, like, say, good public transport, for example. Yet tax doesn't work that way when we look at the fossil fuel sector.
Well, I'm sorry to keep disagreeing with you, Paul, but what if it did work? What if, to restate your question, shouldn't we tax things we want less of and subsidise things we want more of? Yeah. So if we're subsidising fossil fuels, I guess it means we must want more of them. The fact that politicians say they want less of them counts for nothing. What matters is that they spent $14 billion subsidising fossil fuel extraction and use. Follow the money. So I know what you're saying. Like, how can it be? We know we want to have less fossil fuels, but we subsidise them. Well, I can crack that egg for you really easy. They say we want less fossil fuels. They don't mean it.
Which in turn means that they're not serious about reducing emissions and not serious about tackling climate change.
Let me choose my words carefully. They're not serious about reducing emissions and they're not serious about tackling climate change. There is no doubt about that. Australia is the third largest fossil fuel exporter in the world, and we're not only still opening new gas projects and opening new coal mines, we are subsidising the opening of new gas projects and coal mines. This is the big lie. Okay, fine, it's a democracy. We want to cause climate change. We think there's a buck in it. Own that. Say that. Look into the mirror. That's my country. Okie doke. I don't like it, but that's the way it is. No, that's not Australia. We just lie. one of the lies, we have to do it. We have to cause the climate change because jobs, because tax. Not true. And then the other lie, we're trying to reduce emissions. What, by increasing emissions? Yeah, if you put it like that. Right, own it. We will only fix these problems when we stare into them and recognise them. Don't get me wrong, we should put solar panels on roofs. Yay. We should build wind turbines. Hooray, I agree. The Australia Institute's been calling for this for 30 years. Yay, hooray. But you know what? We also have to stop building coal mines. And you don't get to build more coal mines because you planted a tree. You don't get to build more coal mines because Australia's got more solar panels on their roofs than anyone else. If you were trying to tackle climate change, you put the solar panels on the roof and you stop building the gas and coal.
And we know through an array of opinion polling that the public wants more serious action on climate change. That's beyond dispute. What about increasing taxes on the fossil fuel sector that may in fact lead to fewer of these resources being exported and may actually improve the situation as far as emissions are concerned? Is there public support for jacking up taxes on the fossil fuel sector?
Absolutely. There's really strong public support for getting rid of subsidies for fossil fuels, and that's the first thing to do. We don't even have to talk about tax. Just stop subsidising them and watch them yell and scream when we end their subsidies. So don't get me wrong, I'm not afraid of the politics of tax increases, but before we even have to get to the hard bit of the tax increases, can we start with the easy bit and say, could we stop subsidising these foreign companies? Could we stop literally giving them our gas for free? More than half the gas we export was given away for free, no royalties, not a cent. So step one, get rid of the subsidies. Step two, charge them an actual price for the gas that we give them that they sell. Step three, you bet, stick a tax on a lot of this stuff. Works in Norway, works in Saudi Arabia, works in Qatar. Australia exports more gas than Qatar. Qatar collects a lot more tax on gas than Australia. So none of this is complicated. But let me make a different point. There was no public clamour for $300 billion worth of submarines. None. Why did our leaders do it? Because they thought it was the right thing to do. I disagree, but they thought that in order to protect Australia's national security, absent any polling to say this is what people want, they said, hey, little kids, big kids reckon that to make you safe, got to spend $350 billion of your money on these subs. How come you can have subs that have no polling, but you can't tackle climate change even though there's strong public support?
We have tried to tax the mining sector before at a time when they were making unprecedented profits during the mining boom. Didn't quite work out. What do you think we can learn from that failed attempt to get the mining sector to pay their fair share of tax?
Be better at it, be smarter at it, be more disciplined, have a better political strategy. I mean, unfortunately, Kevin Rudd tried to do too many things at the same time, and he picked a whole bunch of fights at the same time. One of them was with the miners over the mining resource rent tax, or the RSPT, the Resource Super Profits Tax, as it was originally proposed, and they handled the politics terribly.
Richard, you're an optimist by nature. You believe change can be driven by the people, and there are plenty of examples of that. How do we maintain a sense that change is possible? It's possible to get rid of the subsidies off the fossil fuel sector. It's possible to make inroads into reducing emissions when so many people at the moment do seem to be succumbing to a sense of hopelessness and cynicism.
Oh, great question. Couple of things. One, change is inevitable. We're just haggling over which direction of change and how fast, right? The world is going to change. Today looks a lot different from 20 years ago. 20 years will look a lot different to today. Lock it in. Changes are coming. We're just haggling about the direction. Every time Parliament sits, someone leaves happy. Don't think for a minute that no one's getting anything. But if you feel like you're not getting the change you want, if you feel like the Parliament's not passing the laws you want, well, good, feel sad. I'll come back to that. But don't say, so you can't get anything done these days. Wonder why it is that other people can get things done these days and I can't. because change is going to happen. Every time Parliament meets, someone's getting the law or the amendment they want. So we have to have a sense of agency. Secondly, there's just no doubt that anyone listening to this, your apathy, your cynicism, your pessimism, or your kids' cynicism or your kids' pessimism is the plan. The people who are winning, the people who are getting paid to take our gas off us, the people who are winning are happy. And if they can make you feel like change is impossible, they keep winning. So if you're like me, if you're stubborn, the reason to feel that change is possible is because they want you to believe it's not. Their strategy is to tell you democracy doesn't work anymore. Their strategy is to tell you change is impossible. Their strategy is to tell you there is no alternative. Their strategy is to tell you you're alone and you're mad and no one else thinks like that. So I hate to say it, understand that the people who are winning are smart, and in order for them to kind of stay in control of the political process, they have to trick millions of young people into thinking, it's no point. And then the third thing, long answer, is look at change that has happened, good change. I'll brag about the Australia Institute here. We spent 10 years saying we need a federal corruption commission. 10 years. And I remember all the politicians that told me we didn't need one, that there was no corruption and we didn't need one. And I'd say, well, then let's have one and just clarify it. Anyway, to be clear, the one we've got now isn't very good. We need to fix it, but we need high expectations. We got one. People said we'd never get one. Now it's not good enough. We need public hearings. We need more transparency. But we got one, even though people said it would never happen. Stage 3 tax cuts. Here at the Australia Institute, we spent 2 years after the 2022 election saying Scott Morrison's stage 3 tax cuts are the silliest idea. They're incredibly expensive. They're bad. They're going to cause inflation in the middle of a cost of living crisis, but nearly all of the benefits are going to go to the wealthiest people. And for 2 years, people said, nah, can't change it, Richard. Albo went to the election saying he'd do it, and, he says what he does and does what he says, and he won't change his mind. Well, you know what? He changed his mind. Good. He was right to. When you're wrong, change your mind. When the circumstances change your mind. That's okay.
And I think also, if you think the notion of being a good international citizen is a fanciful, naive notion, you quote the former Labor Foreign Minister Gareth Evans in your chapter, and he reminds us of the example of sanctions against South Africa's apartheid regime, which cost us, Australia, financially by refusing to trade with South Africa, but they were the right thing to do.
It's not fanciful. It's both the source of my optimism and the source of my white-hot rage. We've done this before. We know how to be good. We know how to stand up to bullies. We know how to push. Australia has played a really important role in world affairs. Not always good. We've made mistakes. We've done terrible things. We've treated Indigenous people terribly here in Australia. We're not perfect. But we've done good things in the past. We played an instrumental role in creating the treaty that protects Antarctica from mining. We should be really proud of that. We played a big role in the creation of the United Nations that I don't think most Australians know about. And no one thinks the UN's perfect and we should fix it. But by gee, it's better than not the United Nations. And people like Gareth Evans, as foreign minister, he woke up in the morning. He wasn't perfect. I disagreed with some of the things he did. But he woke up in the morning and thought, all right, I'm representing one of the largest economies in the world. It's not as big as the US, but it's big. And if I club together with like-minded people and we have good ideas that unite us, I reckon we can get some stuff done. Well, we still can, and we are. We're getting AUKUS done, right? We're getting fossil fuel expansion done. We're saying, hey, Chevron, have some free gas. That'll make America like us. Right, we are getting stuff done, just maybe not the stuff that people listening to this podcast wish we were getting done.
Richard, great to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Paul.
Richard is Executive Director of the Australia Institute, a well-known economist, author and public policy commentator. The Australia Institute believes in big ideas and delivering research that matters, but we can't do it all alone. We need people like you who understand real change doesn't come from playing it safe. That's why we're asking for your support. Sign up to our mailing list to get involved. And if you have the means, you can also donate to ensure we can keep fighting for a better, cleaner, fairer Australia. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.